Hi everybody, Michelle Scaife here again. I'm your extension agent with Better Living for Texans, part of Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service here in Montgomery County. I'm out here on this very chilly morning and I'm responding to some requests about how to cover your garden for a coming hard freeze. So I want to start off by showing you two different things. I want you to understand the difference between a floating row cover and frost cloth, because there is a difference, and sometimes unless you know what you're looking at, it might be hard to know. So right off the bat, let's look at a floating row cover. So right here we have a floating row cover. I want you to see that it's fairly thin. You can see my hand through. So a floating row cover is going to be fairly thin, fairly see-through, and the reason for that is a floating row cover's purpose is to simply prevent pest activity. It may be covering plants to reduce cross-pollination. It might be covering some plants to prevent caterpillars or aphids or other flying bugs from attacking that crop. Sometimes you will see people growing their greens or their broccoli or maybe even some of their other crops, covering them with this, especially when they are young baby plants or when pest activity is high. So that's kind of the purpose of the floating row cover. You may or may not want to use it during a time of frost. It's not going to provide as adequate frost protection as an actual frost cloth will. So let me show you the other. That was a floating row cover. So frost cloth, when you purchase it, you'll notice this one much thicker, right? Right off the bat, we can see a big difference between the two. Row cover, frost cloth. It's much thicker. While you can see my hand through it, you'll notice that it's just more dense, more fibrous. Yes, light can still get through. Yes, water still can get through it. So if you have a rain, yes, the crops will still get wet with either one of these, but the frost cloth is a little heavier. It may or may not be a little more expensive, but a frost cloth is going to give us a best protection option against a hard freeze. So what are we going to cover? In general, here in Montgomery County, we don't have a high issue of damage with frost items. We don't cover a lot of things unless they are tender plants, such as maybe very new babies, very new seedlings, freshly transplanted crops would be covered, young fruit trees. So if those fruit trees are in their first few years, you could take that frost cloth and wrap it around that tree and then secure it with clothespins. You could also use a pop-up tent, like a pop-up party tent you would find with the 4 legs and the cover. That would provide protection for your fruit tree as well. But today, you can see behind me that really none of our vegetable crops here at the Extension Office are covered, and that's because they're established cold weather crops. We're looking at some purple mustard greens. We've got a strawberry bed over here beside me. On the other side are some beets, and then right behind me is some lettuce. These items are established in the garden. They're healthy plants. They don't need covered for a coming frost. But I'm gonna go ahead and use the bed today. So what do we need if we're gonna cover a bed with frost cloth? Well, we need some frost cloth, and you want that cloth to be big enough to cover over. See how high off the ground? These are about 1 foot tall. We want to be able to go to the ground and over the crops. I don't have to put a structure there. It's fine for this to touch the leaves of our plant. So we want our frost cloth. We also want something to weight that frost cloth down with, and I just have some boards that were sitting over by the shed, by the garden shed. You could use rocks, you could use fence posts, a garden tool even, anything that will just kind of hold them down, because as you can see, the wind is blowing here, and a lot of times when we have a hard freeze or a storm come through, that wind is going to be even higher and it may float those things off. All right, so let's look at this. If I'm going to cover it, I take my frost cloth, spread it out, I don't need to fold it up, just a single layer will do. And you can tell this one's pretty big, right? This is a pretty good size. They come in about comes about 5 to 6 foot in width and maybe 12 feet in length. Is a standard frost cloth size if you're buying them in the packet. So I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna weight this down, make sure it goes over the crop, and then I'm gonna go on the other side and secure it with another block. Okay. So as you can see, I've got it loosely covering the top of the plant, secured on one side. I could secure it here as well, secure on the other side. And I'd want to go ahead and secure the front, the back, just to make sure that when the wind blows, it's not going to push it off the plants. So, quite honestly, I have to say, it can be really challenging to find frost cloth available for sale locally. So what do? A lot of times, I personally will shop online, buy my frost cloth at the beginning of the fall season, and that way I have it on hand in my garden. I just fold it back up at the end of the season, make sure it's nice and dry, bug-free, fold it, and I put it in plastic tubs and store it in my garden shed. However, and they last. I have to say, I've had some for years. It's taken me about 10 to 12 years to have to replace my frost cloth and even my floating row covers. They're just fairly usable. If you take good care of them, they're very much reusable items. But if you're in a pinch and you can't find them locally and you don't have time to order them online, you could use muslin fabric from the craft or the fabric store. You could use sheets if you like. You could put a sheet out here. You could cover them with a cloche or a container of some kind. We have a spot over here. It's actually a water spigot though, but we just have one of our large planting buckets flipped upside down on top of it with a rock, and that way that's covered as well. You could flip a garbage can upside down. You could put a cardboard box on top of this garden area to cover it, and just put a rock or something on top to keep that cardboard box from blowing away. I tend to shy away from things like tarps because a tarp does not have a good airflow to it, and it does not let light in, it does not let rain water the plants, and it can tend to suffocate those plants rather quickly. If you have to use tarp because that's all that's available to you, cover the plants after the frost has passed in the morning and it starts to warm up a little bit. Take that tarp off quickly so that you don't suffer damage to your plant. Even if you have to cover a baby fruit tree with a tarp, again, once the weather starts to warm, take it off. If you're using sheets, muslin, or frost covers, there's no emergency rush to take those off. Those can stay on until you come out to work in the garden area, or until the risk of damage is past. Same thing with the floating row cover. It's not something that you emergency need to take off. You can leave it on there throughout the garden season. I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me at my office. I will put my contact information in the description. Thank you so much for visiting me in the garden today. Again, it's Michelle Scaife, the Extension Agent with Better Living for Texans here in Montgomery County.